as an organization becomes larger and larger and there's just more things to do, things just kind of build up. And so I think this is a natural pruning process that we need to take on a regular basis. And I actually think there are specifically 3 times that you should be zombie hunting. 1, at least on an annual basis. 2, when you have a big new goal or challenge that you're facing as an organization, like when you've never done anything before like this, or something is happening that is outside of your control that you need to readjust as a result. That's the best time to go zombie hunting.
Why do they zombies tend to last so long within in an organization, even sometimes when people realize that the zombie's not helping?
Because everybody wants to be a team player, and it takes so much impetus to go into somebody's office and be like, I don't think this meeting is a great idea. I mean, can you imagine how much courage it would take to go into your manager's office? And what I try to do is encourage people to create the space for people to have these conversations.
There's a major crisis facing healthcare facilities management. We have aging employees, aging buildings, and aging infrastructure. We've created the Healthcare Facilities Network, a content network designed specifically to help solve for these 3 pressing issues in healthcare facilities management. We bring on thought leaders and experts from across healthcare facilities management, all the way from the C-suite to the technician level, because at the end of the day, we're all invested in solving the aging issue. Thanks for tuning in. Look at our videos. You will find that as a theme across our content. This is the Healthcare Facilities Network. I'm your host, Peter Martin.
This is actually a first in a number of ways for the Healthcare Facilities Network. It's the first, number 1, because it's the first time we're actually going to be talking about zombies. Not zombies at large, but zombies in healthcare facilities management. Very excited about that. Number 2, it marks the first time that we will have a New York Times bestselling author join us, which I'm very excited about. And you know me, and you know the 3 faces of the men who are gathered around, so we're not the New York Times bestseller authors, so you can figure out who it is. And number 3, Mr. Patrick Murphy. This is the first time that a guest, to my knowledge, has joined us from the ski slopes of Vermont, has literally left a mountain where there's pretty good skiing and is recording an episode of the Healthcare Facilities Network. So these 3 things are all firsts, and I am very excited. Despite all the firsts, very excited to have this group join me today. I'm very thankful. I'm going to do some brief intros, and then we're going to jump into it because Dennis and Mike and Patrick, I know you guys are chomping at the bit to talk about zombies and healthcare facilities management. Diana is the person to set the table to have that discussion. So some brief introductions. I'm going to start with Diana first. Diana Kander, our New York Times bestselling author. Diana is a keynote speaker on innovation and growth. She's written 4 books. Diana was actually the keynote speaker at the Innovation Conference in Columbus in 2025, and that's where the genesis of this came from. I would recommend her highly if you're looking for somebody who's got a great backstory. You know, Diana, I was thinking we could just jump into your story, forget the zombies, how you came to America, how you're driven by goals, and I would recommend to anybody, you know, Diana has 4 books. I only have 3 of them here, Go Big or Go Home, The Curiosity Muscle, All In, Startup. So she's written 4 books, but Diana, thanks. And one of the things you talk about on your LinkedIn profile is the playful tools that you have and the playful tools that you work with organizations. Triple Zoom, zombie hunting, version 2.0. You talk about it in your books. We're going to focus this particular conversation, though, on zombies. And thank you for your time, and thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. You might be my biggest fan, Peter.
Yeah, well, you know what? Hopefully someday Snoop will replace me as your biggest fan. That would be good. So Diana, welcome. Dennis, we're going to go up to you in the big control center. Dennis Ford, who you have seen on most recently about 2 months ago now, corporate facilities management for Atrium Health organization that stretches from the Midwest to the Atlantic coast. Dennis is also your 2026 ASHI president. Dennis, welcome and thanks for joining again.
Thanks, Pete. Love being here. I can't wait to get started here. Thank you so much, Diana, for joining us.
Mr. Hatton down there, Memorial Hermann in Houston, Texas. Mike, you mentioned zombies when we were recording our episode at the beginning of the year. And when you mentioned it, I was like, well, let me throw a Hail Mary and see if Diana will join us to talk about zombies. And she did. And here we are. And Mike, you have now removed yourself as the ASHI 2025 president. You're obviously still VP at Memorial Hermann, but how does it feel to no longer be the president?
You know, it's kind of a little hole in your heart where as we talked before, you barely have time to learn the ropes and your 12 months is up. But I think I handed that off to a very able president for 2026, Dennis. And it was so refreshing at the annual that I had I was so happy to introduce Diana last year, and her message was so topical and so timely. We all deal with the zombies every day, so it was nice to get her perspective on how to improve corporate America. So thank you for having me on this group, Pete.
Mike, I couldn't keep you off. You're the one who said zombies. How do I have a group and you're not the guy on it? So I appreciate it. I'm glad you brought it up, so thank you as well. Aforementioned Patrick Murphy, president of CREF. How's the skiing up in Vermont?
It's great. Thanks, Peter. And it was funny, just before we started recording, Dennis was mentioning, this potential zero gravity scenario that could happen. I have twin 9-year-olds, Parker and Emma, and I'm up here skiing with them. I'm just happy you didn't say today at 3:00 because my kids would have loved it and I would have absolutely hated it. I'm very happy to be planted in a chair here at the lodge away from everybody because it's a zoo. It's February vacation for us here in New England, and I'm going to need a vacation from this, let me tell you. But I'm very happy to be here and very nice to meet you, Diana, and I'm very excited about this with this group.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you answered that because I was going to say, where did you go to get away? But you found a place, so that's good. Thank you for joining. Gentlemen, as we talk and Diana, as Diana is talking about zombies, feel free to jump in. Feel free to interact. You guys have lots of experience. You don't need me to ask all the questions. So if Diana says something that resonates, go right ahead. It's the beauty of a podcast. Everybody can talk. Everybody's got background. But we've mentioned zombies a number of times. So why don't we just start there with Diana? You talk about it in your keynotes. You talk about it in your books. As I said, your keynote's the impetus for this conversation. But for those hearing you for the first time, what are zombies?
Yeah, it's anything that you do during the workday that takes more time and resources to do than the value it creates. So it's not an idea that dies of its own natural causes. Is it alive enough to suck the life out of your organization? So a zombie could be a project that you had high hopes for, but just hasn't materialized into what it could be. Or a zombie could be a rule that was implemented in your organization by somebody who's not even there anymore and people still follow it. Or if you've never been zombie hunting, there's probably a meeting that has way too many people invited and no agenda and could have been an email. And our days, will fill up with zombies if we are not diligent about keeping them away. And so the last thing I'll say about thinking about it, think about everything you do on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of how much value it's creating, and just, come to an understanding that not every hour is created equal. Some returns are much higher than others. And to me, a zombie is anything that is good, but not good enough for what you could be doing with that hour. So I try to make sure that I'm getting the highest possible return on every hour that I invest in my business and not get distracted by things that feel productive but aren't creating the same amount of value.
How did this concept of the zombie, how did you arrive at it?
Oh, it's a great question. About 10 years ago, I worked with a movie theater organization, and they had this phenomenon that they talked about, which was whenever they would move one theater manager to another theater, like somebody who was in the system but was just shifted to a new location, they would do nothing else to the location, but all of their scores, their bathroom cleanliness and customer service, like every score that they kept track of would go up. And it's not like that person was, doing anything big. They were looking at the operation with fresh eyes. And I think too often we get just used to seeing things a certain way or doing things a certain way. And that's how zombies creep up. It's their natural byproduct of being successful. And we need to look at our work with those fresh day one eyes. That's my goal, to be able to uncover them and be like, why are we doing these things? What could we be doing instead?
That's interesting. A byproduct of being successful. Maybe you said that in the keynote, but I hadn't really thought of it that way, that sometimes the zombies are a byproduct of doing things correctly. And is that because they're not challenged as they evolve?
Well, think about your organization as being successful. So I was a serial entrepreneur before I became a speaker, and definitely the things that are going well, I noticed, hide the things that are not going well in your business. And so when in one particular company, we did a financial audit of every one of our customers, we realized that only 10% of our customers were actually profitable. And they were so profitable that they were hiding the fact that all the other customers were losing money. But when things are going well on the whole, you don't notice it because you don't have to notice it. And as an organization becomes larger and larger, and there's just more things to do, things just kind of build up. And so I think this is a natural pruning process that we need to take on a regular basis. And I actually think there are specifically 3 times that you should be zombie hunting. 1, at least on an annual basis. 2, when you have a big new goal or challenge that you're facing as an organization, like when you've never done anything before like this, or something is happening that is outside of your control that you need to readjust as a result. That's the best time to go zombie hunting.
Why do they zombies tend to last so long within in an organization, even sometimes when people realize that the zombie's not helping?
Because everybody wants to be a team player, and it takes so much impetus to go into somebody's office and be like, I don't think this meeting is a great idea. I mean, can you imagine how much courage it would take to go into your manager's office? And what I try to do is encourage people to create the space for people to have these conversations. And I promise you, if you just have a meeting and say, what do we do that doesn't make sense, or we should stop immediately, there will be no shortage of ideas. It takes so much courage to bring those things up.
We were talking about meetings and the effectiveness of meetings, and how generationally, as we bring different people into the workforce, do we notice that sometimes open debate and dialogue that meetings can create can be stifled because some folks may not like to be questioned? They may feel that they're being not necessarily threatened, but picked on. Have you noticed that kind of that is changing, where you have to be really careful in these meetings so as to not turn people? Because you talked about going into the office and saying, hey, this isn't working. Are people receptive to that? And has that changed over the years?
They're not going to do it. What I'm saying is, if you have a meeting and you say, what's not working, they will have all kinds of ideas, because you're changing what it means to be a team player. In that situation, being a team player means coming up with creative things that aren't working, and as a team, working to improve how we work together, versus the other scenario where there is no space on the calendar or agenda to talk about these things. They would have to come up with their own gumption to address it with a senior leader. And that's just too much that we're asking of people.
Interesting.
Where it's really reach out and proactively drag that information from the line staff. Yes. Especially in today's world of virtual communications, I've noticed that as well. It's magnified that even more. We can hide behind our Teams or our Zoom or whatever our software platform is.
Yeah, I always say to leaders, if you believe you have an open door policy, but nobody really comes through that door to tell you anything challenging, then it's not working. You need to proactively go and ask people.
As we bring Dennis, Mike, Patrick into the conversation here, Diana, specific to maybe facilities leaders, and I know you work across all industries and you have great insight across all industries, but what should facility leaders, from your perspective, keep in mind as they examine their own systems through the lens of the zombie?
Well, it's hard as a facilities leader to focus because you don't have a P&L. You have a budget, but you as an organization aren't revenue generating. So quantifying what return on our invested means is up to you as a leader. And that means what are your strategic priorities as an organization and making those as clear as possible so that everybody knows what an 8, 9, or 10 looks like for them.
Mike, Dennis, when you guys, and Patrick, I'm throwing it to them, but you certainly feel free to chime in. When Diana first introduced the concept of the zombie at the innovation conference, when she was up there on the stage, did it resonate with you gentlemen? And if so, why?
I thought it was just so relevant to what we were talking about. And healthcare is infamous for hiding behind zombies. And I would say the zombie in the room is our regulatory environment. The measure of success is nothing but a giant check sheet that we've all used for the last 20 or 30 years. And as long as you check those boxes, you will be a hero. But that checklist in itself in the regulatory environment is, I guess, more of a family of zombies that keeps growing because zombies perpetuate, regulations perpetuate. There's so little time to step back and say, is this regulation really improving the bottom line, or is it improving patient safety, or are we just doing it to check the box? And we're graded on checking the boxes. So when Diana brought that up, all of a sudden I thought it was going to be a touchy-feely keynote, and all of a sudden it's, wow, this is so relevant to what we need in our industry.
There's one example I would love to unpack because I did watch a couple of your YouTube videos there, Diana, and one you were talking about, you were consulting for a company and you were asking them who were their greatest revenue generators, who was bringing in the most money. And for us, I've always been taught that it's the operating rooms, right? So, you have big surgeries, you have transplants, that's bringing in a lot of revenue into your hospital. And to Mike's point, we're heavily regulated. And I did a site visit this morning on a totally unrelated subject, but I love to ask the facility managers what's going on, right? And we got into a discussion about the temperature and humidity in the operating rooms. And so there's an engineering standard that says thou shalt operate within this range. And these guys built a brand new operating room suite, multiple operating rooms. And I asked them, I said, are the surgeons happy? And they said, no, they complain all the time. It's either too hot or too cold. And we'll inch it up a half a degree or down a half a degree, but we can't go that far. And I know this is a little bit of controversy. So that's another reason why I want to bring this up with Mr. Hatton on the phone, because we've come up with a new regulation called ASHRAE Guideline 43, which gives us the ability to create basically our own policy, but it's a multidisciplinary group that you have to get together. You have to define what types of surgeries, what types of patients, what are the risks involved, what would be the outcomes that would trigger any kind of review, etc. But at the end of the day, even if we go through that process and we implement something to where we feel comfortable, raising the temperature for a burn victim and lowering the temperature for a heart transplant, which kind of makes sense to most surgeons, still, if the regulatory body were to come in and see that, they would say, okay, you went out of range. What did you do about it? And we have to have documentation to show what we did. And ironically, I asked the facility manager, I said, what do you do? He says, I show up and I tell the surgeon I can do this or I can't do that. And I said, I bet that really hits home with the surgeon, right? Mr. Little Facility Manager just came into my operating room to tell me, you can only go up a half a degree, sir.
Yeah, so our zombie repellent, i.e. another committee, just wrote more regulations and it really wasn't effective versus getting to the root cause, which is the regulation itself, which lacks common sense and engineering judgment. So good point. That's a giant zombie that happens every day, isn't it?
So I think, Diane, one of your questions would be back to us, what's the true key performance indicator, and it's health, it's hospital acquired infections. And that's one area that I don't think we've made any progress in. I think the statistics are basically the same today as they have been for the past 10 to 15 years as to how many infections the hospital gives our patients when they're under our care.
Yes, and I think the common denominator still is hand washing, isn't it, Dennis? Something as simple as that, and aseptic practices versus temperature, humidity, all those other types of zombies that we've invented in our industry.
Well,
A clean, sterile environment.
Diana, how would you, so here's you guys bring up an example, that's a regulatory body that's imposing upon you. How do, in the case of, excuse me, in the case of individual hospitals, take Mike and Dennis and Patrick, how would they go about trying to slay a zombie that's imposed upon them from a body on high, where you guys can go to your C-level leadership, I'm sure, at times and kind of advocate, but what about when it's that next step beyond what you have direct control over?
I would say that usually my first step is curiosity and trying to understand I'm not saying this is the case in this situation, but oftentimes when people say we can't do this, it's like a rule that somebody else heard and has been passed down. I'm not saying that's what's happening, but I try to investigate the rule. And probably one of my most successful consulting engagements was I was with an organization, they had a software product and they wanted to generate more revenue from this product. And so I don't betray any confidence. I said, why don't we do this really, really obvious thing? And they said, we've tried this, we've thought of this very obvious thing, but we've been told it's too, they're worried about risking upsetting the customers. And so we're not going to do the really obvious thing to our hundreds of thousands of customers. And they're like, we've been told to never bring it up again. And so they wanted to end the conversation. And I was like, well, can we just sit in this problem for a little bit longer? So is the problem alienating hundreds of thousands of customers? They said, yes. And I said, well, could we do a test where we call some customers and say, would this be a problem for you? And then if that wasn't a problem, could we try it on 1% of our customers? So they were thinking all or nothing. And I just wanted to sit in the problem as long as possible to say what was possible. So if there is a regulation that says the temperature in an operating room cannot be more or less than a specific degree, then I would want to, I currently want to call you up after this podcast and explore who made that regulation. Why did they make that regulation? Can ASHI as an association ask, who do they even talk to? But it's the difference between accepting, this doesn't make sense, and saying, well, I want to be curious about where this is coming from and why, and what's even possible, to do in this space.
Yes, but instead of wasting 3 or 4 years of people hours and efforts on committees and more reports and more standards, go back to that root cause and challenge that. And most industries, I know the Kaizen principle and some of the TQM models, they've got data and statistics that could help them fight their case and change those regulations as they evolve. Our industry is famous for hiding behind, the term life safety. If you want to get anything done in healthcare, we just say it's a life safety issue and everybody drops everything. And most of the times it really is not. So I think we've got to challenge those norms, I think, as you've spoke about so often to us, to get to what the true issue is. Good points, Dennis. That's probably one of the hottest zombies we deal with currently. One of many.
Well, and it's a good point that you made, Diana, that ASHI is a group of advocacy for regulatory, and that is something that I'm hoping to get out to all of our state affiliated chapters. Is if these are issues that you're facing, please bring those to ASHI. But another hurdle we have is the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare have adopted a 2012 edition of the code. And even though we advocate for changes to the code, we could be talking about changes to the 2025 or 2026 code, but until they adopt it, the hospitals aren't bound by it, right? So they're still bound by the old code. So that's part of the problem too, and that's definitely bigger than us at this point.
Well, on that same token, though, to speak to Diana's options of the entire regulatory process, our infamous regulators just recently have finished updating the checklist boxes, I'll call those, the KPIs that we deal with, and the effect to make our lives easier. But what it's really going to do is it takes 10 or 15 years of information. It's going to reshuffle the deck. We'll have a lot of opportunities to spend expense dollars on consultings and rewriting software and things like that for the new standards and KPIs, which are really the same standards. And to Dennis's point, it's pointing back to the same codes, but it's some new window dressing and some new shades on top of the same operating environment. So has that really helped our industry, and will that really help us control cost? Or I guess more importantly, is that going to help patient care? I go back to the fact if it's not really improving patient care or helping the bottom line, then we really should be asking ourselves, why are we doing those things?
If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the network. And more importantly, share it with your colleagues in the healthcare industry. Together, we can solve the aging crisis that's impacting all of us.
What are some other zombies specific to healthcare facilities management that we find in both facilities management and PDC? At the risk of opening the floodgates, I throw it out there. In the FM side, on the PDC side, you guys have seen the zombies. You've been around. What are our most pressing zombies that just seem to continue from project to project, year to year, director to director?
Oh man, you did. I mean, planning
got a list.
I know we only have limited time.
Yeah. From a facility operations perspective, we're charged with maintaining the facility over the life of the facility, and buildings have huge lives. You need to have at least a 50 years life cycle in mind for a building. But the design and construction project is held to a budget, and so they try to cut costs from the very beginning, and that really hinders us from being able to maintain that building over the life. We're replacing equipment a lot sooner. One of my pet peeves is actually wastewater piping. The folks in the industry that make the pipe will say it will last 30 years, but in healthcare it only lasts 10 years. So here we are replacing pipe, and we're having water leaks, and when you have water leaks, that's an infection control issue. So there's all sorts of regulatory requirements around it. I tell everybody, when I have a water leak, just by the virtue of you saying I got a water leak, that just cost me $5,000 because I got to go contain it. I haven't even fixed it yet, and then heaven forbid I have to replace the pipe. So planning, design, and construction is tough, and Diane talked about doing the same thing over and over and over. We have these meetings. We can't attend the meetings because we're busy. The meetings aren't very valuable to us because they're talking about patient care and will the lighting be good for this patient, and what color makes them feel better. And we're like, well, what about the chiller or the boiler or the air handling unit? And that's 45% of your construction budget, but yet that's a healthy piece that you can cut from to put in the cool water fountain out front, the architectural feature that hangs from the ceiling that somebody has to clean all the time, the cool lights, that they put in. And we're just, and then at the end of the project, we don't get all the information we need, like an asset inventory to build our maintenance program, or the warranty information, or up-to-date drawings, and unfortunately that's every day. And so we keep doing it the same way, and that needs to change.
Yeah, I think that Diana's counsel and some of her information, I would call that more the silo. We've always done it that way. We're going to continue to do it that way. The silos between the traditional PDC and facilities group, we've talked about that my entire career. I know I'm in charge of both of those for Memorial Hermann, and we broke it down because we forced those teams to get together, and getting the budgets right on the front end will solve that. But it takes a lot of effort and a lot of focus and continuing to keep your thumb on it to make sure you're doing that. But, just shifting gear today, one of the biggest, I guess, zombies I see for PDC are the turf wars about, offices for everybody. That's a huge operating expense. And today with the hoteling and the time sharing and the work from home culture, that isn't going away. And it's probably been very productive for some groups. Everybody still wants their own dedicated office. I've got that on a couple of giant projects we're working on now that we're, arguing how many doctor offices, how many private offices do they need. And I'm advocating for touchdown spaces and things like that. But that's one of those things that no one wants to give up. But just the $50 a square foot for, real estate costs for leases or billing that in, that's a huge operating expenses for at least Memorial Hermann and others in the industry. And as large as the Atrium folks are an advocate, you've probably got giant costs like that would be so easy to drive out of our organization. And I know the Googles of the world and the software people have been doing those touchdown spaces, but I know in our industry, we still have 120 square foot for every director and 100 square foot for a manager. And that's thou shalt be built with every project.
Patrick, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, it's just funny because there's so many places we could focus on. Dennis, you started with the regulatory side. We probably have in healthcare, specifically the physical environment. It's challenging, right? It's one of the big reasons why we're about a decade behind manufacturing and technology. And, there's just a lot we have to answer to at the end of the day. But I think it's also, we're very technical, right? And we're in a very dynamic time, right? We're having a hard time absorbing the technical progressions that are happening. I even, Dennis, I know we've been chatting a little bit about being able to do things, gather data and be more efficient and leverage technology in a way that would maybe give us a leg up, right? To just at least try to get off of the status quo. I come from the engineering side and, I think of things as static or dynamic, and I think of things as vectors or scalars. And, we've been a status quo, static type of business for a long time, very hard to adopt new things. Right now is probably one of the unique opportunities where, like you just mentioned, Mike, I mean, we don't need the same physical environment to administer what we're doing in anymore, but it's so hard. It's like we're sitting on top of an elephant, tugging on the ears, trying to get it through the Sahara, and it's going to go the way it goes unless we advocate. And unless, like ASHI and other organizations, the Healthcare Facilities Network is able to bring a little curiosity to the table, because I think advocacy is what it takes. So that's a big piece of it for me. I think, from the PDC side, it's for me tricky because I think we don't get enough, even I would say 5 years ago, before we started to see this aging workforce issue that we talk about in the Healthcare Facilities Network so much start to occur. It was hard enough to get the right people in the right room at the right time and spend the right amount of time figuring out what the purpose and the outcome is. Today, it's so much more tricky. I mean, like you said, I think before we even came on, Dennis, it's just so hard, to come up with a charter of a project, bring the right key stakeholders into it, and then actually develop that over the course of the project and not realize somewhere towards the end that there was some measure taken to try to bring a project under budget or on budget. And then ultimately, you can't turn that elephant. You're all of a sudden in a situation where you have a prefabbed situation that you can't handle, or they've done something that will, marginalize the patient care quality that you're going to have. And, I think we really need to kind of look at it at the micro level. Like, how can we just kind of come together a little bit more and leverage technology so we get the right people in the room? It's a huge, that's a huge, huge challenge, and it would just be a huge undertaking. But I think this is the time, because we're no longer static, right? We're in a very dynamic age right now.
Further supporting that, Patrick, on every project, we have a propensity to over collaborate. We'll have a committee of 60 when we're designing a renovation or a new building, versus sticking with corporate-wide standards, industry best practices. In the days of AI, we should be able to automate that even more. But I see that very often at some of my campuses, typically those, the higher education associated ones. We have a committee for things and everybody has their own opinion. And then before the end of the job, that leadership is turned over And so you're back to square one. And, there's just not the dollars in reimbursements today. There's no margin in our business and getting worse. So why are we continuing to do those things where everyone else in the business world, whether it's a chain store or a Buc-ee's, gas station and convenience store, or even probably the Starbucks, they all look the same. They're all built the same. They have the same standards. So we're light years behind in that. So good comment.
Diana, not to put you on the spot, but you're always on the spot when you're up on stage, so I'm sure you're very comfortable with being on the spot. You've heard Dennis, Patrick, Mike have thrown a lot on the table across a wide spectrum. Not to summarize what they've discussed, but from what they were talking about, does anything stand out to you or resonate where like there's a light bulb going off in your head like, huh?
So zombies usually come in two forms, and the ones that first naturally come to us are the ones mentioned so far, which is a lot of zombies that are mostly beyond our control. We have an ability to try to deal with them. They're clearly negatively impacting our situation. I would say I try to spend over 80% of my time on zombies that are 100% within my purview of control. So when I think about zombies, I think about how I spend and manage my time, the commitments that my team says yes or no to, the obligations and opportunities that I decide to say yes or no to. And those things, we don't need to worry about anybody else because you control, you're in control. And I think those zombies are the best way for us to get practice at the ones that we don't have control over.
Gentlemen, what zombies do you have that direct control over? Any one of the three of you?
Well, it is difficult to unpack because we are so heavily regulated. And when I'm asked to kind of define a facility management program, that's absolutely where we start. Say, in order to meet regulatory needs, I have to be staffed at this level just to maintain that. But we are a very unique operating entity, meaning, and I've seen this, if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital. So we all find unique ways to maintain our facilities. We implement different types of strategies for maintenance. We also have different responsibilities. Some folks have landscaping, and some might even have housekeeping or security under their purview with facilities, and some of us are strictly maintenance or engineering. And that's where we get into our stovepipe. So, yeah, I see where we would have opportunities in the areas that we can control. But yes, Diane, we get more upset about the areas that we don't.
Well, and it could be as simple as when you schedule meetings with the people that you work with, are you scheduling them for 1 hour or 30 minutes? For after this podcast, somebody tried to schedule a 30-minute conversation with me, and I said, can we do it in 15? And she was like, yeah, no problem. The conversations we have will fill the space that we give to them. And so how do we think about, and how many people we're inviting, and when those conversations can take place. So for instance, you probably have strategic work that takes deep focus and requires, a good couple hours for you to sit and think about how things could be better and different. And it's really hard to find that space on your calendar unless you say the way that I've been structuring my week is not giving me that space that I need to do my job. So how can I put chunks of time on my calendar where I don't take meetings on Mondays or Fridays so that I can focus on strategic conversations? Things as simple as that can have a huge impact on our ability to impact the organization.
I'm going to ask Hatton to respond to that because I can never get on his calendar, so I'm curious. But I did want to ask you a question since you brought it up about time increments. This is a question that we have within ASHI. So at our conferences, we tend to schedule 1 hour or 1.5 hour sessions, but it has been suggested that maybe we should try to limit that to 30 minutes. And I do see relevancy there. But how do we determine from an abstract if it's a 30-minute discussion or a 60-minute discussion?
it all goes back to defining what an 8, 9, or 10 is. So I start with what kind of experience do I want the people to have when they come? And then does this chunk of time or this place on the agenda provide that kind of an experience? For instance, one of the things that happened at my time at ASHI was an awards ceremony, which was incredible. It recognized a lot of people. Sometimes there are even like board meetings that happen on stage. And my question is, like, do we put that at the beginning of the kickoff of the conference? Is that the energy and environment that you want to create? Or is it better placed somewhere else or in the program? That's how I think about everything on like, what am I trying to accomplish? How do I want people to feel as a result? And then I put everything through that rubric on a scale of 1 to 10. Does it help me accomplish this goal? Not to disparage any parts of the
the awards
conference.
ceremony.
No, that's a good point. We want to be everything to everybody, but are you really accomplishing anything without the focus, Dennis? And I think I saw that at a conference I was at last year. They tried to put too many sessions in at the same time just so they could let everybody check their box. And I'm not sure I got a lot out of it because they were all conflicting and overlapping. Hey, let me shift back to construction and project management, which has got so many opportunities in that. And even the elephant in the room is staying on the critical path decisions. We often will, we'll talk around the hard point of, guys, we've got a budget, we've got a schedule, we've got a mandate of these things we have to do. And then we get on to the more esoteric things, because I've noticed a lot in our industry, we don't like conflict. So everybody likes to sing Kumbaya and be feeling happy. And, most of what we do for a living really is almost a contact sports. A Super Bowl is just a week or two behind us. So how do we tackle those things
no
early?
Reminder there, Mike. No reminder.
Oh, that's right. I don't want to bring up
Boston
bad words for my New England friends, but hey, I'm from Houston. We don't know what that means to win anyhow here. So, but how do you bring those difficult topics up in a polite but direct way and check the box and put those in your meeting minutes as these things evolve? Because if you get off those critical path on a little rabbit trail, as I call, we'll never get to the end date, and we'll never stay on budget or schedule. So that's such a problem at least in my aspect of the business.
We call these watermelon projects, which are green on the outside, red on the inside. Have you ever heard that term?
No.
So like everything is green and on track until it's not. However, the people internally know that it's not on track. It's just that they don't have a safe way to communicate that or how to get it back on track. So one, I like projects. I like to ask this question that most projects don't ask, which is like, how would we know if we were off track and when would we know it? Instead of waiting for people to come and be like, this is definitely not going to happen. Because you know what I mean? It happens slowly and then it happens gradually, and then it happens very quickly where you were on track, and then you're like, sorry, it's not going to happen in within 6 months or a year of what we said. And so one of the things about zombie projects is putting in, these are what I call failure metrics or pivot indicators, which do not exist in most projects. How would we know if it's not going to happen, and when would we know?
Yeah,
almost a zombie bully emerges in some of these projects as well. Where people are afraid to bring up that that something is off track because someone is going to overreact, versus it's more of a problem solving tool. So you've really got to address that and make sure we all speak about allowing open communication, but there's not many people or groups that truly do allow it. So that's an excellent point. I hadn't heard watermelon before. That's so appropriate.
Yeah,
it's all shiny.
Common term in software development. Same thing happens. It's green until on the outside, red on the inside.
That's funny. I was going to bring that up. I've managed software projects and I've managed construction projects, and I felt the rigor was a lot better in software, because we did, at least when I did it, we had a safe place to go. We had a weekly meeting, and it was less than 15 minutes to tell where your project is. And I actually had a situation where my project actually was green, but I needed attention, so I made it red, so I could get the attention I needed, and I got the decision I needed. But I had a conversation, and you made me think of this, Mike. I had a VP of design and construction stop me in the hallway one time, and he was telling me about how one of my hospitals that was under construction wasn't the commissioning wasn't going to be completed on time. And I told him, I said, well, I knew that, and I'm working with it, and I prioritized, and I think we're good with that. I said, but it's this other hospital, it's a smaller hospital project. I said, that's the one that's got me worried because they're so far behind that I pulled the commissioning team off of that project. And he was totally surprised. His project managers had been telling him that that project was green this whole time. He had no clue. And the result of it, after a month or so of investigation, he ended up firing the general contractor. So I don't know why people decide to keep showing things green when they have issues like that. I mean, come on, people, let's be honest and let's be open.
It's the bad news doesn't get better type syndrome. And that happens so often. We mask those items. We don't want any conflict, and then it gets ahead of us.
And I think in healthcare, we're just such a unique business because everyone has strategic and then everyone has routine, right? Most people live in the two different silos and they can work pretty nicely in their own silos. But, Dennis and Mike and to some extent my group, we're really trying to integrate those two things, right? It's very hard to do this. And I think, I guess with, this whole conversation, it's left me with a lot of things to think about. But Diana, programs, like you used the term program just in terms of one of the ASHI events, but, my mind, and I think a lot of the guys, I'm sure even Dennis and Michael to some extent, we think a program in a very big way. And I think that where you're trying to go with this, you're trying to say, all right, you got to look at this on a more micro level on how you're managing things that you can handle very much within your own purview and within your own day. Because I have a tendency to look at the program. Like when we come in and evaluate a hospital, we're trying to level set everything because at least at that point, every needle is on every record at the same time. And we can think a little bit strategically, and there are operational things that we can't avoid, we have to pay attention to them. We're able to at least have an opportunity to try to, I guess, balance those things. But, and I find myself oftentimes, trying to think too big. And I think we all have this internal problem of saying, well, we have a hospital to run while we're trying to be strategic. And we've got groups that are very focused in those silos and they're running on their own paths. And, I think if there's anything I'm taking out of this, and just let me know if I'm wrong, but I think we've really got to try to utilize our time on a day and an hour and try to use that and try not to, what do they say, boil the ocean, because it's not going to happen without a lot more investment. At least that's one of the things I'm pulling out of this today.
And just think of the risk involved as well. The least risky item to do is to check all those regulatory boxes, as Dennis said, back to the operating room analogy there. But when you go out on a limb and try to think of the simplest way to maybe not defeat the zombie, but minimize the zombie, you're actually putting yourself at risk when the regulators show up and start, you don't want to be on the top of the list when they read off every morning to the CEO group, where the compliance problems are at your hospital. So it's easy to do status quo, I think, but we're all trying to push. And Diana really challenged all of us last year, is to try something different and get micro and find those individual time wasters and processes that really we're hiding behind. And whether we're calling it life safety or, temperature pressure or all there's dozens and dozens of those check boxes, aren't there, Dennis, that we deal with mechanically every single day?
Yeah, there's a lot of those. Diana, I would love to get your advice on our healthcare facility innovation conference. We rebranded it a couple years ago because we wanted to focus on innovation, and I really love the fact that you preach curiosity, and I still think we're kind of missing the mark as we're reviewing abstracts for the conference. I'm seeing the same stuff. It's the same. Especially regulatory, right? We're going to have our regulatory update. We're going to have somebody talk about this and what's going on in the industry. But how do we really unpack that curiosity, and how, as an ASHI board, do we kind of carry that forward? And I was telling Pete before we started, about half the members are new this year, and so you've got some new eyes, you've got some curiosity there. But also one of the challenges we have is rehashing things that we've talked about before. And so we see that a lot too, right? That, we've already been there, done that. Let's move on. So how can we bring that curiosity to the innovation conference, and how do we handle the whole, we've tried that before and let's move on?
I would just say personally for me, my innovation comes whenever there's some kind of idea that makes me think. Innovation is marrying two disparate ideas. And so before we started recording, I said, who should come to your conference is the head of facilities for Google and Apple, who brought goats to mow the lawn at Google, and who had this really creative campaign to have people stop using water bottles inside of their large facilities. And I'm not saying all of the sessions should be like this, but if you get people who are doing similar things but completely out of the industry, they're going to have a unique perspective that makes the people in the room have ideas of how they could try something or implement something. But if you have everyone who's doing the same thing, it doesn't give us an opportunity to really dream about what's possible. So I'm a professional speaker, and I don't look to other professional speakers for inspiration of what's possible. I think about musicians who are, in a sense, creating each song is like a 3-minute piece of content. So how do I create my information in a 3-minute piece of content that is so sticky and so memorable that, people are going to take me all over the world to say this 3-minute thing. And here we are on this podcast because of a 3-minute thing. So I would just say I'm inspired by people outside of my industry who make me think and dream bigger, but that's true for all of us.
Diana, I still get extremely excited every time I hear Ice Ice Baby come on the radio. Not so excited about all the Snoop Dogg songs.
Hey, Dennis, to your point there, just piling on that, we call ourselves innovative, but as to your point, if it's the same curriculum and if we're really not trying anything new and it's the same speakers, it gets stale in a hurry. So I think that's been pointed out by several people. So I really applaud your efforts to keep stirring that up and really try to change, as Diana was nice enough to challenge us last year to keep this moving.
So we are coming to the close of our discussion, and I want to thank our guest Diana Kander, Dennis Ford, Patrick Murphy, Mike Hatton. Diana, from an inspiration perspective, and I would encourage people, if you haven't followed Diana on LinkedIn, go to her LinkedIn, and if you go to her posts, there is a ton of content there, and dianakander.com, ton of content there, and it's digestible. You're right. You can take those 2 or 3 minutes, but who are some of the people that you go to draw inspiration from?
I mean, you're going to laugh at me, but I think about, for my work ethic, I think about Shohei Ohtani, who I'm a big Royals fan, but he's the greatest baseball player who ever was. And that's where I set my standard. Do you know what I mean? It's not like people who are a little bit better than me in the industry. It's like completely different industry. Yeah. But the standard for excellence, you can watch him during baseball games. He's looking at an iPad in between innings because he's constantly taking notes, refining. Every year he picks one thing that he's going to be exceptional at. So one year he was the best at stealing bases, and one year he worked on his velocity out of the park. So he picks one thing a year. And so that's how I model my career. I pick one thing, and I'm going to work on that one thing for an entire year and not get distracted by all the things I could do and become crazy dangerous at this one thing that I've picked. And so I pick people who I just pick the standard that I want to meet to push me of what's capable. And then the other one is Taylor Swift. There's a documentary about how Taylor Swift prepares for her tours, and she'll do a half marathon on a treadmill while singing all songs. She'll run for 3 hours while singing every song on the tour to prepare. And it's that level of preparation for your craft is the bar that I'm trying to reach. Wow.
Very interesting. Does your brain ever shut off, or is your brain always going?
No, I get very excited about what's possible. And I think I shared this in the talk, but my I don't judge myself by how well I'm doing. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, where am I today versus what I am capable of? And I think if we all asked ourselves that question, it would create the necessary space for us to invest in growth for ourselves.
Excellent. Very well said. Gentlemen, any final thoughts? We've got about 2 minutes. Anything you want to throw in?
So topical. We really need to expand this even more and talk about some of those other concepts. I know I personally, since I'm more of an operations and technical person, I read your book on the sales approach. Since I know nothing about sales and I'm such an introvert, I would never do that. But I found that was quite interesting about, especially the analogy of all the lawyers coming for an interview. They all looked the same. They had the same presentation and they didn't differentiate themselves. So how do you differentiate yourself? Which really we could do at ASHI as well as we go to that true innovation versus the same old, same old. We're all clones, literally. So good stuff, good inspiration.
Excellent.
I think that's
Well,
what
Diana,
we're looking for moving forward is just how do we get ASHI to advocate for the facilities folks? How do the facilities folks share with us what their issues and zombies are, and then how can we take that to the regulators above to help us out as an industry?
Can I ask one quick question, Diana? Yes or no to you? And should leaders go to their frontline staff and ask, what are the zombies that you're dealing with?
At least
And
once
does it
a year.
happen?
Never.
Does that? Never. All right. Well,
But they know, I'm telling you, they're just sitting on it and they're just waiting for an opportunity for somebody to ask. And it is the highest engagement thing you can do for your team to ask them what's not working.
I saw a YouTube of Diana. She said to fire yourself every 2 years. So if you had to fire yourself and re-engage, how do you re-engage with the staff and how do you have those conversations? I'm the new guy coming in, what's working well, what's not working. I thought that was great.
How do we give them the safe space to bring up those zombies to create change? And how do we not overreact if it's not presented in a manner that's so corporate America-like? I think that safe space to listening, if we could ever get over that. And so much of our day are check boxes. I'll go back to the check boxes, the thou shalls, I think was Dennis's term.
All right.
Well, if anybody wants a zombie hunting guide, you can email me. I'm Diana@dianakander.com, and I'll send you a full 5-page facilitation guide to run one of these sessions with your team.
Awesome. And people can get in touch with you at that same address. Diana, Dennis, Patrick, Mike, thank you for your time. As always, thanks for watching the Healthcare Facilities Network. We'll be back with a future episode. Thanks for watching.
If you want to be a guest on a future episode of the Healthcare Facilities Network, go to healthcarefacilitiesnetwork.com and let us know who you are and what you want to talk about, because together we can solve this critical aging issue.